Hi, everybody. Okay, looks like we're just waiting for Mark. And Vincent's connecting. How are you, Ernie?
Good.
That's good. You enjoyed the rain this afternoon? We needed it.
Oh, I was up in Littleton, so I didn't get to see the rain today.
Oh, okay. You missed it. Yeah, you gotta look
I'm
back.
disappointed. My tomatoes are but my tomatoes are happy.
That's good. That's good to hear. Good to hear. Hi, Vincent.
Trying to get my headphones set up where
Sure.
construction in the house is displacing my normal meeting space. So get my headphones on and find my corner. So I'm still getting settled a bit.
Very good. All right. We'll know where you are. That's good. Hi, Brian. You back from semi-vacation?
Yeah, in New Jersey.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Mhm.
Newark, Brian.
Say that again?
Where was the semi-vacation? Newark?
No, it was real vacation. It was my in-laws. They don't live in Newark. No.
Oh, no, I was joking. It's the only part of New Jersey I know, though.
All right. Let Mark know we're on the line and then we can get started. Okay. Okay, we have a quorum, so let's go. How are you, Rod?
Good, thanks.
Great, all right. First item on our agenda is to approve the agenda, and do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Ernie. Do we have a second? Thank you, Melissa. And then any discussion on the agenda before we vote? Heads are nodding no. So all in favor of the agenda? Let's raise our hands, and it looks like we have 5-0. Okay, thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is the public comment. And I see we have two members of the public, Nancy Osgood and Linda Cook. Anything you'd like to comment on that's not on the agenda? We'd love to hear from you. And you're on mute right now in case you're not aware. Okay. Okay, well, if they pipe up, we'll defer to them, but in the meantime, I don't hear any motion. So next item on the agenda, the main item on our agenda is the land use regs. And thank you, Rod, for putting together that document, extremely helpful. So we'll hear an overview from Rod, and then if you remember the agreement that we made at our last meeting, we'd be talking about hopes and dreams regarding our exercise that we're doing here, reviewing the land use regs, what we want to see accomplished. And Rod will let you take it away. We have, let's see, 15 minutes allocated for this part of the meeting. So we'll work through the presentation and then we'll have discussion. Okay. Rod, how long do you want to take on the presentation?
15 minutes would be great. Okay, so
okay.
I've
Thank
shared
you.
my screen. I just want to get some feedback from folks as to whether they can, whether it's all legible. It should be kind of a pea green
I can see it very
Um,
well, Rod. I can see it very
all
well.
right.
At the others,
Okay.
can everybody see? Anybody who can't see?
All right.
Okay,
Good. Great. Okay. So let me just start with a very quick overview from outer space. So this is Google Earth, which is a tool that many of you are probably familiar with, but we actually use it for implementation of the land use regulations on a daily basis in Norwich. So this is a version of Google Earth that shows the zoning districts that we have. And I have another layer that actually shows roads and parcels, but I didn't want to introduce too much noise into the picture here. But if people need that to orient themselves once we go in a little closer, maybe, then that's totally fine. So the first impression, I think I've said a couple of times by now, so that particularly the new planning commissioners should be familiar with this statement now, and everybody else should be used to it too. 97% of Norwich's land area is rural residential, and so that kind of mid-green, that kind of celery green color that dominates this picture, that's what that means. That's the rural residential district. So this is the very northwestern corner that we share with Thetford and Sharon. This is the Thetford boundary line. This is the river. This is Sharon all the way through here. And this is a little bit of Sharon right here, and then mostly Hartford to the bottom, to the south here. So the implications of this arrangement will become more apparent as we go through the discussion. So now as we zoom in, hopefully Google picks up a couple of landmarks and we begin to get the kind of outlines of the road network. And underneath this celery green color is an ortho photo from 1985, as it turns out. The original imagery is from 1995, but this version is from 2013. So very little has probably changed in any kind of meaningful way since that image has been taken, which would be true for most of Vermont, actually. Right, so this more mustardy color that you see here, hopefully you can make out my mouse jumping around. The mustardy color is village residential, so-called village residential 1. And you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice is that this is 91 and Route 5 going through town, and just sandwiched between I-91 and the river is another chunk of village residential 1 that takes in that interesting neighborhood. It's basically a cul-de-sac that McKinnon Road that comes off of 10A, just between the interstate and the river, and then the oddly named River Road right along the river, which is also village residential 1. This chunk here, this darker brown, this kind of caramel color up here, which is squeezed into the triangle that's formed by Church Street, otherwise known as Route 5 North, and
91 is it?
91 is village residential 2, and it has very slightly different standards in a couple of regards from village residential 1, and is a more recent add-on. And then right here in the very, very middle of the village is the village business district, and you'll see that that is literally just a couple of blocks big. Takes in the so-called financial district, which comprises 2 banks and a bunch of other offices, and Tracy Hall, which is right here. So that's it. And then the rest of it, this celery color, is rural residential. So the important thing to figure out about that is that not everything in the rural residential district necessarily conforms to people's picture of what rural residential looks like. in other words, there's a lot of variability in the range of structures and the size of parcels, and even to some extent the uses within the range of rural residential. So I just wanted to give you that as a background, and then we'll switch to the table that I included in the packet. I think that the easiest thing to do is to sort of ask for some feedback or questions from anyone on the commission initially about what the table, what's contained in the table, and then I'll try and just give you a very quick overview of what the purpose of the table is and how it works. And then I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper on some of the issues. But just if anyone's got some very basic kind of comprehension issues, this is the moment to ask.
Yeah, Rod, once again, this is Jackie. I really appreciate you putting together this very succinct summary of the current regs that we have. And one item I think would be useful, because we have two new members, Vincent and Mark. And by the way, Mark has been able to join us now. If you would just spend a little bit of time talking about PUD, what that means.
Okay. Okay. So let me. What I'm going to do, Jackie, thanks,
Yep.
is I'm gonna basically read very quickly from left to right at the top of the table. So the first, so they're just numbered 1 through whatever it is, and they're uses that are allowed in any one of the 5 zoning districts that we have. So running across the top of the table, you've got 5 categories: rural residential, village residential 1, village residential 2, village business, and commercial industrial, which we didn't actually discuss. For those of you that need a little bit more help with that, just get rid of that. This deep kind of pink color down the bottom, bordered by Route 5 on the western side and 91 on the eastern side, that takes in King Arthur Flower and a bunch of other places, all the way down to the Hartford border. That is the entire commercial industrial zoning district, which is not particularly large relative to the total area of the town. And we'll get onto that in a little bit more detail later on, but I forgot to mention that that's where that was. Kind of a Freudian slip. All right, so P means permitted, C means conditional. P for permitted means that the zoning administrator can issue a permit and it doesn't have to go to the DRB. So it's a level of review question. If you're looking at this table as a property owner and you find that you want to do something and you get a P in your column for the zoning district that you're in, then all you need to do is talk to the zoning administrator and get a permit. It's kind of the terminology that you might use in other jurisdictions is a so-called as of right application, right? So the presumption is that you're going to get it. C for conditional is the exact opposite. It means that there's a process to go through to get it, and that process involves going before the DRB. And the definition of conditional means that there are specific enumerated conditions contained in the regulations that you will have to meet before you're given a permit. And it's not, there's some degree of interpretation, but there's not a great deal of variability. And the other important thing to remember in Vermont is more terminological thing maybe than anything else, but in Vermont, under the Vermont statute, we don't issue variances very broadly. And in the Norwich regulations, we do not have the ability to offer waivers. So we can't waive conditions. You either meet the condition and then you get the permit, or you don't meet the condition and you don't get the permit. That's the way it's supposed to be.
That's what we've been discussing in the general section for the last 3 meetings. So that's
Right.
really helpful to see it,
Right.
Distinctly portrayed here, but that is the detail we've been discussing
Right.
the last.
Yep. And then
Yep.
PUD stands for planned unit development. This is a now old approval process whereby so-called dimensional standards are set aside as long as the applicant can show that the project conforms to other standards and doesn't impact the neighborhood in a negative way. The dimensional standards, so the height of the buildings, the distance between the buildings, the number of buildings on a parcel, and the distance between the building and the boundary lines are all variable according to the application, and the DRB has to approve whatever's being proposed. But you don't have to adhere to the same setback requirements and standards that are contained in the zoning regulations. It kind of straddles the subdivision world and the zoning world as a regulatory tool, and it allows for applicants to have a more imaginative solution in terms of arranging the structures on the land that could be more efficient than the regular subdivision. So imagine cluster housing, where you might have townhouses or sort of an arrangement of condos or tiny houses that are all pretty close together and might even share some fundamental resources like storage or places to put your trash and your recycling, and a community compost pile and those kinds of things. And in the exchange for living closer together, you've got more uninterrupted open space. But overall, the size of the parcel would be the same as if you subdivided it, but you just get a more efficient use of space. So shorter driveways, less impact on the environment, those kinds of things.
And Rod, in recent times, how many PUD or PUDs have we had in Norwich?
None.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Right.
Now,
wanted
I mean, I can elaborate on that later, but basically,
Right.
no.
Yeah, just so everybody's clear, this is in the regs, but it's nothing we've ever that's ever happened, actually.
Right. Certainly in the time that I've been a zoning.
Yeah, in
administrator,
the time that we've all been here, right. Okay.
Right. No, I've not processed a PUD application. Okay. So heading back up to the top of this chart really quickly. There's lots. This is
Do you want
actually
to put
really.
the chart up? Do you want to put the chart up, or we
Yeah,
still?
I can do that.
Okay.
Let me see what I'm doing. Let me see if I can do that. I think what I'm going to do is something funky. Okay. Can people see it now?
Yep.
Great.
I can.
Okay. So now you get the advantage of the my notes to myself, which you don't have. So okay. It would be my expectation and my intention that this table would actually, without my notes, would actually be part of the approved land use regulations that we're working on right now. So I would describe a good land use regulation document actually comprising a table like this, and so that applicants and members of the DRB and others can have a handy reference to see how the regulations apply to them and how they work in an abbreviated way. But tonight's one of the benefits of looking at it this way tonight is I get to show you some gaps, some absences, some conflicts, and some areas that need to be worked on. So all land use regulations are living documents. They get changed over time. They're like lots of other policy documents that organizations build, and it takes a lot of discipline and control, and it's a sign of a very well-run organization when policy documents maintain their consistency, maintain their consistent voice, as if they're written by one person, and so they're voiced the same way consistently, and that one chunk of the document doesn't contradict another, or that there are things missing. The existing zoning regulations and subdivision regulations in Norwich are living documents. They're not written in a single voice. They're not well organized. They're not well documented. They're out of date. They're ripe with contradictions, and there are definitions missing, and then there are definitions that are now no longer consistent with statute. So there's a lot of work there to do. And the notion that group of people is best suited to actually resolving those issues, I've got some concerns with. I think it's easier to have somebody do the work and then the group respond to that work, which is not to say that whoever does the work is right or what they say is final, but it's much easier and more effective to have somebody go through the document, identify the issues, and then come up with the group response rather than trying to have a group do that process at first step. So accessory use or structure to a permitted use turns up in the use section, permitted use section in the zoning regulations. And it's not just a grammatical issue, it's kind of a structural and legal issue. An accessory use is not a permitted use. These are not, because they're not uses in themselves, right? So an accessory use is something that is added onto an existing use. So the example here would be an accessory dwelling unit is a use that's accessory to the major use on the property, which is a dwelling unit, right? It's not that you could have a gas station as part of a residential property, right? Because those two things are in conflict. It's either going to have to be a gas station or it's going to have to be a residential property. It can't really realistically be both. That's not a great example, but that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. That's also true of the next point. So an accessory use is, again, it's just not a use in themselves. They should be relegated to a different category. So it's just a category problem, but it makes for a structural problem in the way the document's organized.
Mm-hmm.
In this gray shaded area, you actually see the definition of accessory structure and accessory use. And so that's why, with a bit of time, you can look at the way that these are identified and see that it doesn't really work.
And so this is from our old regs, is what you're saying.
Yes,
right?
this is the old,
Yep.
and this is, so it's one of the things that needs to be fixed.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so looking at number 4, the enlargement or modification of a 1 or 2 unit dwelling. This is listed as a use only in rural residential, and it's not a use. One of the weirder implications of the way this is organized is that it would mean that if you were in the village residential districts, either 1 or 2, you couldn't actually enlarge or modify a 1 or 2 unit dwelling because it doesn't identify that in the existing regulations, right? So it's one of those absence problems that comes from just the way it's written. And again, enlarging or modifying a dwelling, that's not a use. That's a change to the structure. It's not a change in use, right? But for those of you like Vince who are actually doing some work right now, or Mark, actually, I see your wall in the back of you there. This is just kind of a weird. This is just a weird anomaly. All right, it just is like wrong.
Hey, can I interrupt for just a second, please?
Sure.
So what you've got here is the regulations as they stand now. Is that, do I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I was wondering if this is what you were recommending, and I was looking at that one. That was the first thing that hit my eye, and I'm going,
Yeah.
No,
this is so wrong.
This is a response to what we have now.
This is the current state. This is all the current.
Okay.
This is current,
All
this is
right.
current
All right.
conditions.
All right. So
Yeah,
Yep.
good.
I don't have to ask questions yet.
That's good.
2009 reg. So to that point, maybe Rod, want to open it up for those who have studied the document and might have some specific questions. This is very helpful, the overview you're giving us.
Sure. Okay.
Mhm. So maybe we can go around the room. Brian, or anything you want to ask?
Yeah, are we going to keep going down the list? I have questions later, but not on anything.
Well, Rod
yeah.
wanted to spend 15 minutes, providing an overview of the document that he had distributed before. So we're into that time now. So I just want to make sure we have time to.
I'd really like to get to the bottom of the document as
All right, keep
quickly
going
as I
then.
can. Yeah. All right. All right. So multi-unit dwelling. Right now, that definition doesn't work with statute anymore. A multi-unit dwellings with 3 or 4 should be treated differently from 5 and more because statute actually breaks out and treats multi-unit dwellings 4 and below, or 4 and less, differently from 5 and above. And then you cannot use the PUD method as an approval method for multi-unit dwellings, which is what the current regulations imply, because it actually doesn't work that way. You're dealing with, multi-unit structures, not, there's technical reasons why that doesn't work. Mobile home park, we don't have one in Norwich, but nevertheless, it's not a use. It's a form of development. Accessory dwelling structures, we've got 2 definitions of detached apartment. We've got 2 definitions in the regulations: detached apartment and accessory dwelling structure. The definition of in statute actually allows for an accessory dwelling unit to be part of a primary structure, whereas in our regulations, it prevents the ADU from being part of the primary structure. So there's a problem there. There's an inconsistency with statute. The definition for group homes is no longer in, it's not the same as statute anymore. And in particular, the separation distance that you see spelled out here has gone. And then the other part about this is that what's really bad about this practice, which is why it's highlighted, is that the standard that you see here described is contained in the definition rather than in the regulations themselves that reference the definition. And so there's all sorts of problems with that in terms of application. Nursing home and residential care facilities, the only place they're not allowed is in the rural residential district. The only place you're likely to ever try and do that in Norwich is in the rural residential district. So it's effectively saying that you can't do nursing homes or residential care facilities in Norwich because there's nowhere else appropriate to do it. Home business, the definition in statute uses the term home occupation, which is a much better term than home business. And then home industry should actually be home business. Home industry has connotations with impact that don't apply to the notion of home business. So the distinction between home business or home office and home industry are pretty significant. You know, a home business might be a small repair shop, like a small engine repair shop. Somebody who's turned over their garage is basically willing to take on, repairing the neighborhood's lawnmowers. At home office would be, somebody who's basically working from home. So there's a lot of reasons why those definitions need to be cleared up. The bed and breakfast definition is, again, it contains a standard, which is a poor practice that's problematic, and it needs to be distinguished from short-term rentals. So since these regulations have been written, the advent of Airbnb and whatever the other one is that everybody else uses, which I can't remember the name of right now, have emerged. And in some communities, that's a significant issue. I don't know the extent to which it's an issue in Norwich, but handling short-term rentals and dealing with short-term rentals in a more effective way, and maybe having bed and breakfast be part of that definition is probably the preferred route. You can see home daycare is not defined in the regulations. It's inconsistent in its use, and the listed use relies on other terms that are defined, and whereas family childcare home is defined in statute, and it would be better just to stick with that. Moving on down, this one here is a big one. Agricultural structures, agriculture and agricultural structures. Our definition is no way consistent with statute now. Farming is, as defined in statute, is allowed everywhere. That is every zoning district. If for whatever reason you thought you could farm out the back of the Muskoma Bank building in the village, that the state is fine with that. you'd probably want to have a pretty high value crop. So I'm suggesting cannabis, which gets me to the next question, which is we don't have anything to do with cannabis in these regulations, which is not surprising, but we have to encounter cannabis. It's now permitted as a business activity, but somewhat weirdly, ironically, given what I've just said, the state Department of Agriculture has expressly defined cannabis as not being agriculture, which, you know, is a little weird for those of us that grow plants. But anyway, of, you know, any kind. So that's a weird one, but we need to address cannabis production in this version of the regulations, and we need to address the fact that farming is kind of as of right, regardless of the zoning district. Then the last part about this is our regulations don't address agricultural enterprises. And I don't know if people have been following the local news very much, but there's been a very controversial case recently in Woodstock about a restaurant that's kind of a farm to plate type arrangement on the outskirts of Woodstock, you know, the Woodstock village.
Yep.
On the Pomfret Road. It's been very controversial. It's been a very expensive legal case for everybody concerned. It looks like the restaurant project is going to go ahead. It got permitted because it was defined as, it met the state definition of agricultural enterprise, right? So it's a restaurant on a farm, not a very big farm. It's a big restaurant, and it's in a rural residential area, very similar to much of Norwich. And there was sustained opposition to it, and then series of legal cases, and it looks like it's going to go ahead at this point. So we do need to encounter that. The other version there is the so-called wedding barn. So there was a wedding barn. Actually, it was an adaptive reuse, in inverted commas, of an old historically significant barn on Happy Hill. It managed to attract strong support in the neighborhood and also strong opposition. And I don't believe it's operating anymore, but it is precisely the kind of use that gets neighborhoods really in conflict. And so it is something that we're going to have to address. Forestry is the same deal. It's as of right. And if it meets the statutory definition. Sand and gravel extraction, it's a term mismatch problem. It's in the definition section of the document, it's extraction of earth resources, but in the document, in the body of the document, it's referred to as sand and gravel. It really just needs to be referred to as extraction. It is an issue in Norwich because there are active quarries. Contractors' yards, they're not allowed in rural residential, which is the obvious place to put them. And I actually know of at least 3 or 4 contractors' yards in rural residential. Under the existing regulations, there's no way to permit them. So if I was to receive a complaint from a abutter or a neighbor or something about one of these contractor yards, the operator of the contractor's yard is going to be in a very difficult situation because it's basically not permitted. Right now, it's a sort of situation of letting sleeping dogs lie, but we should do something about that. The last one, couple here, public facility. This has been very problematic recently, as has community center, as has cultural facility. All these definitions overlap, particularly with reference to education, and that's been a cause that's made life difficult for the DOB recently. There's no definition for a bank, which, you know, probably good to have. So an office is defined. The point I would like to make here is that because there's no mixed use district in addition to the village business district, and because the village residential districts are so tightly drawn around the residential use, there isn't much ability for an expansion of office type activities in the village area outside the village business district. So think here, therapists, dentist, insurance office, you know, a variety of fairly low intensity, you know, financial advisor would be another one, fairly low intensity, low traffic, you know, not significant in terms of traffic generation or anything else, potentially with, you know, good frontage on Main Street or sides, you know, Elm Street or something near the village. Right now, there's not a way of permitting somebody to have part of their home become their lawyer's office or whatever. It's just not permitted. And I think that the tiny size of the village business district is something that we should visit as we're moving forward. Adaptive reuse. This is not a use. It's a type of development. I know use is in the word, but it's really not a use. Okay, you don't say this is my adaptive reuse business. You have a business that's been located in an adaptively reused building. You know, so the common one here for those of us that have had lots of urban experiences, you know, repurposing of an old mill or a factory, right? It could be a brownfield site. It's totally gutted. It's redeveloped. It's got residential uses on the top 2 floors. It's got retail and commercial uses on the first floor. That's an adaptive reuse of the building. It's not a kind of use. It's a kind of development. So, and the point that I want to make here, which is a little bit odd, this number here is really important. 1972 is 50 years ago now. What this means is that any building older than 1972 in Norwich could be used for anything with this definition. So this is sort of this weird unintended consequence, like it's like a get out of jail free card. If you go the adaptive reuse route and you have a stacked ranch on Huntley Street that was built in 1971 and you want to open it as a cannabis boutique, then and claim that it's adaptive reuse, I'm going to have a really hard time denying that permit. But no one's done it yet. So, because they're smoking, I guess. You know, that's just a weird, it's just a weird thing that needs to get fixed. And then same with mixed use. It's not a use, it's a type of development. The multiple principal uses on a lot anywhere would be okay, I think. And I think that what is the underlying assumption in these regulations is that you have one use per lot and one structure per lot. And that's sort of a bias, unconscious bias in the way the document's been structured, which kind of points to its age more than anything else. So that's my summary. I'm happy to take questions really quickly, or happy for people.
That's great, Rod. Once again, I really appreciate you putting this together in such a digestible format. Very helpful. Maybe if we want to take the screen down, we can see who has questions. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Vince. You're on mute. Yep.
Yeah. Rod, since mixed use is one of the things that in the town plan that it addresses that we need to move forward with, can you explain more? Can you elaborate on what you were talking about with the mixed use? Because I think of mixed use as what, like a 4-on-1 kind of a high, you know, mid-rise apartment or something where it's all in one building. Are you saying that it can be? What's kind of the goal and the spirit of the town plan, and is it just one lot can have multiple uses in multiple different structures?
You could have a mixed use district, which would, and different towns do it in different ways. So let me just give you some background here. One of the reasons why communities end up looking at mixed use is that, particularly in New England, the maintenance and upkeep on an old Victorian home, large home, is actually pretty high. And so one of the ways communities have addressed that is by saying, you know, this inner area that's not quite downtown, but not way out in the sticks. So it's got sidewalks, it's got, you know, parking fairly nearby. It's got good amenity. It's a walkable neighborhood. But it's dominated by old, large homes, arguably too large for regular residential use. Like one family. It's too much for one family, right? So they will say things like, you can have an office on the first floor, and as long as you've got an apartment on the second floor, or then you're fine. And they'll write rules for that in a so-called mixed-use district. Some communities just go, yeah, this is a mixed-use district. You can have the whole thing be offices. And again, the kind of offices that I'm thinking about, they could be insurance offices. They could be a setting where it's an old mansion or a large building, a former school. Like there's a couple of examples on those buildings immediately over the road from the inn. I'm kind of blanking on what they call, but there's a couple. There's a building, there's a brick building almost over the road from the inn, and it's broken into small offices that people rent individually from the property owner. That's a perfect example where it could be, that could be part of a mixed use district. So you could have it flexible enough so that could be a combination of apartments and offices or something such as that. Or, depending on how relaxed you're feeling about it, you could go out as far as retail. You could specify certain kinds of retail uses. You might want to encourage cafes in a particular neighborhood, right? For instance, so you say, under certain circumstances, you could do that. The Carpenter on Main, whatever it's called, Carpenter on Main, there's an example, weirdly, of that in a funny kind of way. Like it's, like it's kind of a residential building as it fronts on Main Street. Then it's kind of got that weird thing hanging out the back, which I'm never really sure about. But that's an example.
Yeah,
They get away with it because they're in village business, but you could imagine that slightly further out and not being necessarily horrible depending on its location or your point of view.
Yeah, some communities use it to make more walkable areas,
All right.
encourage a sense of community, so as I say, you can live and meet people at the cafe in the same place, that type of thing. So those are other applications for it, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that makes sense, Vince. If you want more examples or want to think about it more, it just allows for more than one use in a structure, and certainly more than one use on a lot.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Sure, I just want to make sure that I understand the distinction, because what I think I understood is you describing a mixed use district as just like a naming convention. Like it might as well be called the popsicle district, right? But actually, in fact, what you're talking about is an area where you have many types of permitted use, and you allow multiple permitted uses per site, right?
Yes.
And you're not like forcing a specific combination of uses. It's just in a certain part of town, you would welcome and encourage more than one of the other permitted uses at that site.
Yeah. Yes, and you might need to think as a group. When we get down to it, we might want to think about it in terms of what kind of uses would be compatible with what other kind of uses, or more to the point, what kind of uses do we really think would be incompatible? So, like if you define a mixed use neighborhood as bigger than the village business district, but somehow a bit smaller than the total village area, you still might not want to permit a welding shop, right? Or something like that, right? So there might be things that you think would be really inappropriate as a combination, but you might be okay with saying hairdresser is an okay use combined with apartments above, right? And so there's an example of that. If you go behind the Ledger Bank, whatever that little street's called, there's a small white cape that's got a retail space on the first floor. I think that's been converted to an apartment now, and up above it at the back is a hairdressing salon, right? So it's so there's actually examples of each one of these things that I'm thinking about, literally within walking distance of downtown. Like you'll find them right there. It's just a question of how many more are you comfortable with allowing for, and in what area exactly.
Yeah, so just to summarize, it increases the possibilities more so than maybe in a commercial district or a residential district. You can have more things going on in one place, but you can also limit the number of things that are allowed. So,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
when you make up the rules. So, yeah.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Ernie. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the rest of the discussions about specific little pieces are taken care of first, because I want to make a sort of more general comment. So I'll wait until everyone's finished with asking little detail pieces,
Okay.
like the
Yeah.
one we just finished.
Any other detailed questions of explanation, definitions, purpose of what we're doing here?
mean,
Everybody's in good shape?
I have lots of policy suggestions, but that's not the process that we're talking.
No,
about.
that's not what we're doing right now. Yeah, yeah, right. We're gonna get to that because I do want to spend some time on that, on just what we want, you know, what are our initial thoughts on our objectives going into the rewrite, okay? Ernie, you want to make a comment and then we'll move on to
Oh,
that?
Well, I think that's what I wanted to address, actually.
Oh, good. Okay, great. All right, then that's a good segue. I appreciate
Sorry,
that.
I did have one question.
Go ahead.
Jackie, sorry. Rod, other than a couple ones you identified, like the home office, are there elements missing from this list that we should consider? Like, are there uses from other examples that we could add, or really we should be trimming rather than adding?
I think for the most part we're okay. I think the most likely one is probably going to be home office, because the challenge to wastewater and even potable water are pretty minimal. I think that the scope for, sadly, I think the scope for more cafes and restaurants is pretty limited in the current context, not because of what we're saying from a regulatory standpoint, but more from a infrastructure kind of point of view. And then the only other thing is, I think that the examples are already sitting in and around the village, and it's just a question of, like there's for instance on Main Street, just past is it just past the library, I think, or before the library? There's a house with a barn that's been converted into a bookstore, and it's it's kind of it's sort of like
Yeah, with the Ukraine flag and the.
that's right, exactly. And so
Mhm. Yep.
that's a household that's been doing that for a really long time. I'm not even sure entirely of the permitting history or how that really works, but that's another kind of classic example, right, where it's pretty low intensity in a certain kind of way, and it doesn't make demands on infrastructure or a whole bunch of other things, because it's not like a commercial kitchen or anything. So you can see that being viable. So yeah, like think about antique stores or small businesses like that are not really going to challenge the infrastructure. So I think our list is probably basically okay. As much as I think, more cafes and stuff would be kind of fun, I think that there's some serious limitations to that.
No fun in Norwich.
No.
No fun allowed. Okay.
All right. And then if you want to go back to the map, I can put the map back up if there's something there that you
actually,
want to check.
I mean, I think just leaving it this way is good for now.
Okay.
If anyone needs the map, please, by all means, ask for it. But I do want to make sure we hear from folks what are their goals and objectives as we work on the rewrite. Okay. Anybody want to start us off? Go ahead, Ernie.
Okay, well, I want to start off with something that Rod said early on. And I want to say that I reject the notion or the premise strenuously. This is not appropriate for a single person to author all the regulations and then have us just rubber stamp them. That is completely wrong. That's completely opposite of what having a committee to do this even is. So I reject the idea, and I will do everything I can to make sure that there is not just one person writing all the regulations. I don't believe that is appropriate. The statute says that it's the planning commission that drafts the regulations. I'm going to take that literally. I do not believe that it might be efficient in a sort of strictly business way, but we're not dealing with business. This is a part of a democratic republic, and I am going to take that seriously. And I will reject any attempts to treat it otherwise. And I think that townspeople ought to know that there is a sort of a potential for making this one person's work. I think that's just wrong. And I think it needs to be, I think the townspeople need to know that's what's happening here.
Go ahead, Brian, you want to comment on that, please? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I just, Ernie, with all due respect, I understood the suggestion as something like not anything like what you're imagining, right? Like with the administrative section, you thankfully took the time to go through the entire document and make very helpful policy recommendations based on your experience. And in that way, you shouldered a lot of the burden for the review of that section. And then many of us commented on your comments. Some looked back to the original, but you took the lead to get us going in reviewing it in great detail. My understanding of the suggestion was just that at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to sit down and write something, and that's just not practical in a meeting setting. And it's not taking the voice away from other people or taking the ability to comment and even bring new content. It's just recognizing that it's work that can't happen in this setting. Does that make sense? I just didn't understand it like you understood it.
I think, well, I didn't think I was working alone, to be honest. I thought I was part of a process, and other people may have chosen or not to do.
No, you were part of the process, Ernie. You definitely were part of the process and will continue to be part of the process. Nothing is approved until we all approve it. That's the way this works. But
What I'm saying is that
we need some good content to start with. We need some good documentation to start with. And we want it to be professional, and we want it to be, based on the facts and the statutes that we all don't have that much knowledge of. So I think it's extremely helpful to have someone take the lead, and then we take it from there. That's how I think we can get the best product. I'm interested in the best product here that I think we can all help with that.
I think even thinking of it as a product is not exactly helpful. This is, like I said, this is a legislative body. It's not a business, and it should not be sort of, I don't know what the right word here is, but basically everyone has an equal say in what happens here, no matter who they are or if there is a title to their position within this group. And I think that it's kind of like, I worked on legislative council in Vermont for a while. And, you're there writing up a legislation, but you are talking to the legislators constantly. And you're constantly handing your what your words are, you think are their words, what you think they want. You're not saying what you want, you're saying what they want. And so if we're going to have somebody who's going to act like a scribe, which is what Leg Council basically is, they happen to be a scribe with legal knowledge, they're all lawyers, then that's fine. We can do that. But the real ideas, the real inputs should be coming from the board, not from anybody else. Well, we can, let's put it this way, we take the ideas that we hear from other people. We're not formal representatives, but we have been appointed by formal representatives of the town, in other words, select board. And it's our job to be listening to input and so on and so forth. And some things we've done stuff like that. We've had surveys and so on. So when we're doing that, we're doing our job. But I don't.
Yeah, so let's start with the real ideas, Ernie, because I think that's also a good segue. What I'd like to hear from each of us, what are our goals and objectives for this rewrite? Because that's where it starts, okay? We've had time to consider this. We discussed doing this at the last meeting. We've sent out materials and reminders and, what are your specific goals and objectives? Let's hear from each of us as we work on the rewrite. What do you want to see in the final product, okay? And why don't we go around the table? Melissa, you've been quiet. Do you want to start?
I mean, I want to make changes that make sense.
Mhm.
We haven't rewritten these zoning regulations for many years. We wrote a new town plan, and there's some objectives and goals in there that we would like these to reflect.
Mhm.
I'd like them to look professional and read so that they're usable. And
Mhm.
I think those are the goals I have.
Thanks, Melissa. Mark, I know you've given this some thought. What are your goals?
Yeah, I think, Rod, I appreciate the walkthrough. I'd read through the document and your qualitative walkthrough was helpful. The thing that just stood out most to me was that we've got to remove the inconsistencies and make the corrections that are where what we have is no longer the same as what the statute is. And so I hate to say like just clean up, but I think that number one for me is this isn't done if we have a document that at the end of the day is inconsistent with what the town wants and what state statute is. I can go beyond that, but I thought that's a safe place.
Yeah,
to
it's a
start
good
the
start.
conversation.
That's a good start. And if you have things to add, we'd like to hear more. Vince, what are your goals and objectives here?
Yeah, I agree with what Melissa was saying, that there's just a lot, almost everything in the town plan that's been updated. There's not really anything that touches on it now. So those are a lot of things, just like the forestry and environmental issues, and like we just talked about mixed use or combating the sprawl, and just all those issues haven't really been addressed. So this is the best way to do it.
Thanks, Vince. That's good. Brian?
Yeah, everything everybody said is fantastic. I think having the ability to show someone the map and then not just and like being able to do so with a straight face, right? Like you look at the map now and even just the delineation of the zones is like, well, it's possible this was accurate 13 years ago, but I doubt it. And it certainly bears no relation to reality today. And then when you get to the uses, like going beyond just the inconsistencies and really being aggressive to the extent that we can in terms of using the policy tools to help achieve the objectives. Because we know that without these implementing tools, the development pattern is just going to continue. And so I think recognizing that this is one of our few policy levers to implement the town plan, I think we should go for it. If we recognize that many of us, if not all of us, won't be around the next time this is done, I think we should not miss the opportunity.
Okay. Ernie, when you think about the content specifically, because I know you're very interested in updating this document. You have been since day one. What are your goals and objectives in terms of the content?
Well, in terms of the content, I would like it to have no conflicts or ambiguities. I think I've been saying that even before.
Okay. Yes, you've said that many times. That's been helpful. Yep.
But the specific vision, I guess, is a better way of saying it, is I'd like to see this town remain a rural town. And I mean, and by that, I mean largely open land, largely farmland. I'd like to see more farming done in this town. I'd like to see farming welcomed, not just sort of put up with. I'd
Okay.
like to see forests protected and I'd
Mhm.
like to see large tracts encouraged
Mhm.
for, keeping a working forestry landscape, which
Yeah,
from what I can tell from, talking to the extension services and so on, since we don't have virgin forests, we kind of have to maintain our forests now.
Yep.
I'm totally behind that, but do not want to see this town become a suburb in any way, shape, or form.
mhm,
There are thousands of those scattered all over the country. We do not need more homogeneity in this area. I'd like to see this town become more welcoming. And I don't mean with low income housing. I would like to see the people who have lived in this town their whole lives, or people that have been here a long time. I'd like to see them not be being pushed out as they are being now. I'd like to see things that bring down the taxes. And I don't think, and I absolutely know more population does not bring down taxes. I've recommended people to read like Philip
Mhm.
Hoffner and other people who've done the studies.
Yep.
I mean, the scientists who know what they're talking about. They're not politicians. They're not developers. They're not bankers. They're not corporate people. They're actual scientists, and they have said population and growth create higher taxes. It's very simple. I want to see things that control the growth in this town very dramatically. This is a small town. That's what people who like me who moved here moved to it for. And I don't think that we should be denied what we moved for just so that people who've just moved, who aren't even in the town decide that this is a good place to put their McMansions and large luxury developments and so on and so forth. So I am going to do everything. I want to see the regulations reflect sort of the visions of the people that, for instance, believe that climate change is maybe the number one issue. So therefore, we have to control how much development occurs and how far you have to drive to do it. I think sprawl. I think Vince talked about sprawl. I completely agree. Sprawl is like the worst manifestation of overdevelopment and basically ruining our environment.
Okay.
Basically my vision is to prevent a lot of stuff that I see right now is poised to happen to the town.
Thanks, Ernie. That's helpful. I'll just go through some that I have, and then we can talk about next steps on this, unless anybody wants to add anything else. But I would like to see a much more diverse housing stock. I think we all know that the preponderance of single-family dwellings really limits who can live here, who wants to live here, and who can stay here. So that's an objective that I have. Preserving the forest blocks is another, and incorporating the requirements in new building that I know our energy coordinator is prepared to provide counsel on. The preserving the rural character, and I guess back on diversity of housing stock. The adaptive reuse of historic structures, I think, is extremely helpful in preserving the character of the town. I'd like to see us be able to do more of that. I'd like us to have an R&D facility. Wouldn't that be great? So that we can lower our tax structure, take advantage of all the brilliant minds at Dartmouth. And I'd really like to see that kind of, more of that kind of activity in our town, so that we could reduce our tax structure, our residential tax structure anyway. And then, childcare, recreation, I think those are important considerations, and I'd like those to be incorporated into our thinking as we move forward. So those are some of my hopes and dreams. Anybody else have anything else that they wanted to add?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
This is Mark. Yeah, thanks. I've actually have a question for Ernie. So Ernie, I fully agree with you that if there were more farming or more blocks of forest, I think the town would maintain it. I think that's a big piece of maintaining the character of the town. I wonder if that's compatible with, like, we have this 97% rural residential. If that goes to 95% rural residential, and I don't even know if that's on the table, but hypothetically, does that change? Or do you think that changes the character of the town if we go from 97 to 95? And I don't even know if we can talk about that, but like,
Yeah,
I'm
and
trying to think of what's on the
that-
table.
It's a really good question, Mark. It's a really good question.
The answer to that is, I would say, first of all, it's not about the character of the town. It is about what the town is. Character, and I'm going to just say character sort of implies that it is an overlay or an applique to what the town is. The town isn't a rural town just to make people feel. It's not an amusement park that's based on rural living or something like that. It is an actual way of being. It's an actual way of being for the town. It's an actual way of being for the people. Like I said, I mean, you can if people want to have sprawl and dense development and all that, there are plenty of places like that. There are plenty of places where you can have nothing but chain stores and so on. I don't think anyone who moves to Vermont or New Hampshire or Maine, any of these northern New England states, moves here to live like they do in Canton, Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. Okay, this is where you come to get away from that nonsense, not to encourage it. You don't want to bring it here. And so I think that changing the character is not really the issue. I'm not sure if 2% more land being developed changes anything or not. I would have to sort of look at what those changes are, quantitatively and qualitatively. They may enhance the place. I mean, some people, some of these things, one of the ideas that I like about the affordable housing people have sort of been talking about is accessory dwelling units and stuff like that. I think that's kind of a cool idea. And I've been putting a lot of thought in how we can actually do that. That will actually increase the population a little, but I think it is an absolute, and I just said it a minute ago. It is an absolute provable thing when you do things that you think are going to increase the tax base. They don't. They generally require sacrifices. If whatever you give in one hand, you're taking out of the other, and it never ends. I've been involved since I was old enough to vote in town politics. From suburbs in Boston. It doesn't matter. I mean, I know this is how it always works, and there's always a devil to pay. And so I don't see that happening here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's helpful. I want to move on to the next,
Jackie,
next steps. Yeah, go ahead.
Jackie,
Mark.
can I jump in? Sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry. So that was a question, but I did want to get some input. So I guess one idea I had is that we have this core part of the town, and if that part of the town were 2% bigger, so it was 95% forests and farms, is that something that could get to the point where, we have lots of regulations. I know the permits, and we will go through those things, and I'm not proposing that we do this, but if that downtown were 2% bigger, would that allow more room for businesses or more room for mixed use or something like that? That would also contribute. Like, is that?
Yeah.
Am I the only one who's thinking about this, or just I'm trying to think of ways that we can make an impact?
You are.
Yeah, I think we have to back up and consider the whole picture, and one of that is one idea that we will be considering is, do we need more zoning districts? 5 is a very tiny number, and do we need more differentiation? We will do that. That is something that we will look at. All right, would that help us to avoid the sprawl that we just talked about? And go ahead, Rod, you had your hand raised. I'd like to talk about next steps. Yeah.
Yep. So this is more intended for the newer commissioner. So
right.
The existing regulations call for the rural residential district having a minimum parcel size of 2 acres, and then we apply a density formula for new subdivisions, which can mean, depending on the size of the parcel, effectively the minimum parcel size goes up. I guess I've seen some around the 20-30 acre mark, but that's pretty rare. That's a very steep parcel with a lot of other natural resource issues. So the point I'm trying to make here is that right now, the term that we use for the single biggest zoning district contains within itself kind of a contradiction. Where I'm from, you either have something that's residential or you have something that's rural. You don't really put them together because farming is really farming and residential neighborhoods are really residential neighborhoods. What we've got in Norwich that's defined and referred to as rural residential in other parts of the country, for instance, Pennsylvania, they often refer to that as estate zoning districts, where the assumption is that somebody's having a large estate. And they might set the minimum parcel size pretty high. Or they might have a straight up rural district as well, where the expectation is that it's going to be extraction industries and farming and forestry, and the minimum parcel size again will be fairly large. One of the ways that the Norwich regulations are novel is the use of the density factor. One of the purposes of the study is to try and determine whether that novel tool that we have is really giving us the outcome that we want, which is protecting rural landscapes, while also providing for residential development of those same rural landscapes, right? Now, we know it's at a really low density. We know that most of the minimum parcels that we're creating since the advent of current use are in the 30 acre and above range. And we know that that's mostly for tax purposes, not for other land use purposes. So we're operating in a market, in this instance, the tax market, if you like, that generates certain kinds of constraints or certain kinds of market responses on the part of people. 30 acres of Norwich is a pretty expensive thing to have, which means that households that are going to be able to participate, move to Norwich and participate in that are going to have a pretty significant amount of income to do that. So you get back to this question of, if you want more variety, if you want more diversity in terms of household type and household form and who contributing and participating in the community, and you want to use land use tools to do it, then maybe you do want to look at creating zoning districts that clearly do work to protect the working landscapes, which would be farming and forestry, but then also other zoning districts that clearly do encourage, I hate to say it, I don't mean it in a pejorative way because I actually don't find it necessarily pejorative, but something slightly more suburban, right? Where you can have people develop homes on.
Well, it's more concentrated, more
It's
concentrated
more
development.
concentrated,
of
right?
homes.
And it doesn't have to take the form of a suburban street. It could be,
Right.
it could be a
Right.
different kind of approach. It could be clustered
Right.
housing with conservation lands that are preserved and stuff. It doesn't have to look suburban, but you could achieve higher levels of density closer to the village and closer to services. So these are the opportunities that you have as a group to contemplate.
Right.
These are the kinds of things you can think about. And I'm looking forward to that part of this process where people get to see scenarios play out, what it would look like if you move the levers in a particular way. But I think we need to get past this kind of diametrically opposed kind of conversation and recognize right now the regulations do allow for fairly dense development of the rural residential district, which is 97% of the land area, in a way that makes it look actually pretty residential and function as residential, not function as forestry lands or agricultural lands. So
Thank you. Thank you, Rod. That's good. So yeah, all right,
welcome.
we're getting up the learning curve. This is helpful. Let's give some, when we get to the future meeting schedule and agendas, let's talk about what we want to do next with this, okay? Because I want to move now to the wastewater study and the status.
Okay.
Rod, you want to talk about the standing committee?
Sure. So I can't remember now. It was not the last select board meeting, but the prior select board meeting that the select board finally approved the membership of the wastewater steering committee. I communicated that with Andrew Day and the consultant from DG Group, or for DG, the Frame Group. And I expect to hear back from her later this week. And so I would expect that the members of that group will be receiving materials and hearing from her very soon. for a kickoff meeting, and then I'm expecting them to be in the field really soon. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay.
I
All
would
right.
expect the ball to start rolling and be quite brisk.
So it has how many members now, Rod? How many do we, does anyone know?
It's huge. It's 7 or 8. I can't
7 or
remember. I can't remember where we
Okay.
left off. I think it might have
Great.
ended up being 7, which is probably. I mean, it doesn't matter because it's not a voting group, so you can't
I
get stuck in
understand.
that.
I understand.
Get stuck in that
Yep.
4-4 thing. But it's a good group of people with a wide range of experiences. I'm really happy that people stepped up. So.
Thank you. Mark, thank you for representing us. Any questions or comments you want to offer before we move on to the next item?
Yeah, I guess my only comment is, as I continue to prove with my questions, there's a fair bit of education that I'm lacking on some of this stuff. And if the other members of the commission have preferences regarding wastewater, I guess my goal is to represent the commission for that study. But I only know what I know, which is obviously limited still. So if there's another venue or way for me to, or for folks to share your thoughts with me, I would love to do that. And even if it means, on the previous discussion, Rod, if I should just sit down with you and you can talk me through some of the zoning stuff, because again, qualitatively, you gave me a lot more information than I was able to get from reading. But for Vince and Melissa and Ernie and Brian and I guess I want to represent your thoughts for the wastewater, but I don't know your thoughts for the wastewater, so I don't know the best way to get those. So if you have thoughts, I guess you could send them to me, and I will do my best to represent collectively what the 7 of us think.
Okay. So noted. That's really helpful. Thanks, thanks, Mark, for reaching out. Okay, good. Okay, next item then on our agenda is the scoping document for the sidewalk trails bypass master plan. And just to call your attention, some changes that we discussed at the last meeting. The committee starts when it's the, I guess, representative committee is formed, representatives are selected, and then the chair is elected. The committee will elect the chair. We made that add the last time we were together. And we also, I also added it ends when the implementation process is launched. Okay. I thought that was, good idea to include that. From my perspective, we shouldn't totally define what that means. Some people suggested a standing committee at our last meeting that would always be dealing with this topic, but I think rather than try to think all that through, I would leave that to the committee to define where do they see as the best implementation process. I think they might have some ideas. May need to form a new committee or pair up with some town employees, or I don't know what they will think of doing in terms of getting it done. But I think we should leave that to the committee. Once they define the plan, how would they launch implementation? And that's when the work is done for the moment. And then the implementation plan obviously is, or the process, I should say, is in motion. And we also added an activity of including the history of sidewalk development, having that documented and all in one place as a part of this work. So know where we've been, so we know where we're going. And we also added 2 proposed committee representatives, the fire district representative and the planning director. Those were inadvertently omitted from the last draft. Okay. So anything else on this particular scoping document? Are we okay with how this reads? Okay. Silence is good. Is that true? Nod your head if you think it's okay. What's that? I missed it. Yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Just last week, we discussed whether this was going to be a planning commission subcommittee or a select board subcommittee.
Right.
How do we determine that? And
Good question. I don't think we did determine it, but if somebody else thinks we did, please correct me. I don't think we did. Go ahead, Rod, you got it.
Hi, yeah, there's sort of a bureaucratic answer to that one, Vince, because it's comprised of people from other bodies, the
Mhm.
overarching body, if you like, without wanting to sound hierarchical at all, because I don't think it works that way. is the select board. And so it'll be similar to the wastewater steering committee thing. It'll
Yeah,
it'll
it's
it'll
okay.
go it'll go to the
Work
select board, and then they'll publicize it, call for nominations, and
Okay.
you know, or reach out to the individuals on each one of those other of those other bodies and get a name, and it'll go forward that way. And I think that, without wanting to bog us down too much, we've learned from recent past practice that it's best to formalize this kind of process, this creation process a little more, just with regard to establishing things under open meeting law and making sure that it works according to statute. So yeah, that I'm assuming that that's the way it'll go forward.
Okay.
So the next step, Rod, is bring this to the select board. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can't speak to when it's going to land on their agenda right now, given what else they've got on their plate. But yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's I'll talk to the select board chair, and if
Okay.
people are happy with this, and then we'll move forward.
Do we need to vote on this as a group and, recommend that it go to the select board for approval?
I don't believe so necessarily. I mean, it's nice in a way to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, memorialize it that way. But
Yeah,
it doesn't,
formal-
if people are feeling like we can just move this forward, that's okay too.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't mind formalizing it. Anybody opposed to that? Yep. Okay.
Does somebody want to draft the motion then, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I move that we approve this scoping document for sidewalk trails, bike paths, and master plans, and move and present to the select board for their approval.
I'll second, Jackie.
Thank you. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? I see 4 hands. Ernie, we need a roll call. Are you with us? I'm not sure you're on mute. Yep.
I'm going to oppose.
Okay, all opposed is 1, would be Ernie. And, okay. Off and running. Okay, next item on our agenda is the announcements, reports, director's update. And we have some correspondence from the Affordable Housing Committee that was in your packet. Rod, you want to provide an update, and then we'll move to the anything else that anybody wants to add, and then affordable housing?
The let me start somewhere that's significant. So the zoning administrator that we went through the process of recommending appointment to the select board for, Stephen Bauer, did a great job. It's past tense. He took the full-time job of zoning administrator in the town of Woodstock. So he's left the employment of the Regional Planning Commission, and he's now with the town of Woodstock. So I wish him well. That means that I'm the acting zoning administrator again. We've also had absolutely no response to the zoning administrator advertisement that's been running in various places for a couple of months now. And so last week I dusted off my old job description and have advertised for a planning director / zoning administrator. And that is out there. I'm working with various people in the profession to try and get attention paid to the position. So advertising it in places like master's programs for planning and so forth, in addition to the more normal places like Indeed and so forth. I've not received any response yet. I'm hopeful. And then I personally would very much like to have somebody do my old job. And so I'll keep it posted, but it's out there. It's on the town website, and a bunch of other places. So we'll see how that goes. Apart from that, from the zoning standpoint, for the zoning administrator standpoint, that it's not been particularly busy. It pretty normal, or maybe it's definitely quieter than last year, but that's not to do so much with less construction. I think most people are struggling to do construction because they're struggling to get the materials and the people to do it with. But Mark and Vince have probably got more information on that than I have right now. And so it's been maybe a little quieter than last summer. A lot of it, that the zoning activity was last summer was kind of inquiry based about people potentially purchasing Norwich property, not actually proposing to do something to existing Norwich property. So kind of a background inquiry stuff that zoning administrators deal with a lot. Apart from that, the planning function is going okay. There's not a whole lot else on. I think there's been some interesting cases that I've already I've referenced one tonight. So I think that if people go to BT Digger, for instance, and try and search through the archive and find material on the Woodstock case, that's actually interesting. That's fresh right now. It's happening, you know, in real time. And then there's been a discussion statewide about the challenges to do with housing in general, missing middle housing and affordable housing. So just the widespread nature of the crisis and the multifaceted nature of the problem, I guess. And so if people are interested in catching up on that, there's plenty of material up there as well. So apart from that, everything is just, you know, going along, I guess.
Thanks, Rob. Any questions for Rob? Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Rod. The last meeting, we asked for an update on the select board taking up the last affordable housing subcommittee request. And if there's been any movement with the fire district, anything to know, because we have like a pile up of requests on affordable housing and seemingly no interest and movement from the select board. Can you tell us what's going on?
I would describe it as no interest. I would describe it as the select board just grappling with the stuff that's on the table already, which is challenging and time consuming. So I would put myself in the same boat as in terms of the role of town manager. So yeah, I wouldn't, I know the feeling of being ignored or feeling like you're being ignored is troubling and difficult. I don't think you're being ignored. I just think it's a ranking prioritization process that's going on here. So
Do you think we could get something formal or even informal from the select board that says, we don't have any immediate objections to these issues. We expect to consider them in such and such time frame? Because some of these things, like there's like cycles, like biannual or annual cycles, and we're just like are going to keep missing out on things, and just want to get some expectation, some sense of expectation from them.
I'm happy to
That's
transmit.
reasonable.
Yeah, I'm happy to transmit that back to the select board and see what they can do in the agenda setting process, and then I'll let you know. At this point, I can't speak to it in any detail, but yeah, I get the frustration.
In my observation at the last meeting, when we did bring this to the select board, whatever meeting that was, the idea of investigating the lands that have been identified for potential development, for a few affordable housing units. We're looking for a study to see if it's feasible. The committee is looking for a study. And I know Cheryl Lindbergh raised a problem maybe with a deed or something. It feels to me like a next step that might be helpful to the select board and others is just to explore that objection with Cheryl. And I know Jeff LaBelle is willing to do that. And I would suggest that, the two of them at least, and maybe with the fire district or whoever else has knowledge, have the conversation, learn more about it, and bring that back. Would that be helpful?
Let me just say, I've reviewed the documents that Cheryl provided, I think at this point, it's a pretty definitive statement.
Mhm.
The legal import of it, I've not seen a lawyer respond to it.
Right,
Jack Candon, who's an attorney, works for the fire district. The general impression I would form from reading the material that Cheryl provided is that to change that would require a townwide vote. So,
Yep.
that's not a small undertaking. And
Mhm.
in terms of, timelines and agenda setting, if that's the case, then as we move into the formulation of the warning for the next annual town meeting, which is in the November, December timeframe, is
Mhm.
the next time that would come up. It reads as a pretty substantial obstacle. Now, if Jeff and Cheryl want to get together informally and see if they can figure out something, or come to a better mutual understanding of what the import of those words means,
Yeah, what the problem is, what the
what the
words
problem is,
mean.
that I think that's great. I don't gauge from Cheryl's response that she's opposed to it. I think she's just doing her
Due
duty,
diligence, which is
her
helpful,
due
yeah,
due
very
diligence
helpful.
by saying, look, that's fine, but there's this paragraph that says this. Like,
Right,
not sure how you're going to get around that.
Right.
So
Right.
that's my very simplistic
Mhm.
summary of the situation. And I've had conversations with other fire district members, and I think that
and I wouldn't rule out a
they're not
town,
opposed. They just see this, that they've got a responsibility to their to the members of the community, their members, which is the people that are part of the fire district.
sure, but I mean, I wouldn't rule out a townwide vote either, so I mean.
No, I don't.
Fine.
It slows
we could
everything down,
townwide- Yeah,
but
no,
I
I know,
think it's
we
fine.
can do.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian, you had something else you wanted to say, keep going.
Sure, I have a strong disagreement with your view of her position. Rod, the words she used were, she said the people who were on the fire district at the time that was conveyed would be rolling in their graves if they knew this was being considered. It's a deeply felt position as opposed to a legal analysis. But that aside, that has nothing to do with the question, which is, we're requesting a technical analysis of the parcels. That is not implying that a transfer, that a conveyance or any development is imminent.
True,
It's a request for a technical analysis. And so we want to know, like, what's the holdup? Like, that the legal issue with the development rights is separate and could come later, just like with any of the other parcels. There are multiple issues. Why do we have to keep waiting to do the technical analysis? That's the frustration.
I'm imagining, I hear what you're saying, and I respect your point of view. I didn't hear that coming from Cheryl, so that about dead people rolling in their graves. So that's an important piece of information that I didn't have before. I know I was at the meeting, but I didn't catch that. So thanks for that. What I'd say about the holdup is, if the select board can't see a clear path and the fire district can't see a clear path to the creation of parcels and the transfer of ownership of those parcels from the fire district to some other entity that's going to develop them for affordable housing, I think they're reluctant to engage professionals to do the technical analysis. So, for instance, one of the first things that needs to be delineated is exactly how big would these parcels be and where would they be. And so, if there's not a legal path that results, a fairly smooth legal path that results in the transfer of ownership or the transfer of development rights, then I think that they're on both the fire district and the select board are understandably, reluctant to move forward. I think that the understanding that they're working with is that they want to better understand and resolve that legal issue first before they make any commitment. And so, separate from and quite apart from what the disposition of the fire district is, but I think that, I think that if you're right, then Cheryl's also signaling something really important.
Mhm.
And so,
Okay.
and so
And maybe,
that, that further clouds it.
it's probably, I mean, a broader discussion with the fire district board, which I think Jeff is willing to go do. And I think, I don't see a downside, he'll hear what the story is and, go away, maybe have some ideas, read some more, find out more, see if there's any ideas for a path forward or not. I don't see a downside there. Okay. Brian, do you think, does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, that was already authorized,
Right.
so that's great.
Yeah. Right, okay. And then the other matter that you want to talk about, the letter from in the packet?
Yeah, sure, just
grant-
the memo that you see in the packet is about the other parcel that was identified in this extensive and quite helpful study that Rod led, the parcel that includes the transfer station. And so the bit of technical analysis here could be funded by a planning grant, which the subcommittee hopes to have an application for, but it requires the select board really push and go on it. And so once again, we're asking the select board to take up the matter and do the necessary steps so that we can work with Two Rivers to put together an application. So I'd love to see some movement. And yeah, any requests for additional information that they have would be welcome, and we'd love to engage in dialogue. From this group, from the Planning Commission, I think similar to the last memo, we're just looking for like a sense of the group that we're all in agreement with the overall objectives. We recognize the study that Rod led, and we would ask the select board to take up the matter. So I'm happy to make a motion to forward the memo to the select board in that regard. But we're not, like endorsing any specific development plan for the parcel or even any conveyance. It's just asking the select board to do the necessary steps to work with Two Rivers to put together a planning grant that would let us engage a technical consultant to explore development potential at the site.
Can I ask questions?
Go ahead, Melissa.
So wait, is this the place, this is at the transfer station and this is a site where the former dump used to be?
So the parcel that includes the transfer station proceeds up the hill and into the woods quite a bit north.
Up Boston Road,
Along New Boston.
or New Boston Road.
And so our understanding is that the old dump was at the south end of where the transfer station is now. So really the opposite end of the parcel from where we would be thinking development might be possible. But that's one of the issues that we'd like to explore.
Okay, but it would still be like at the dump, at the
No.
transfer station?
No.
No.
So like there are other houses that abut that parcel, other home sites that abut that parcel. And it's a pretty big parcel.
It's a big parcel. It's a
Theoretically,
really-
wherever a home site could be on the north end of that parcel would be like as far away from the transfer station and former dump as other nearby homes are. But we don't know if they have development potential kind of like up the hill into the woods.
Okay.
This is up. Oh, sorry, Melissa.
Yeah,
Right.
is it ledge? Could you find water? Could you put a septic in? That's what we have to find out. But this is like the furthest point possible from the transfer station. And as Brian.
Did I get
out
that
there-
right, Rod? Is that consistent with your understanding?
Sorry, I was actually trying to pull a map up. There is debate and there's some conflicting information. So yes, the parcel's pretty large and it rises up abruptly from basically where you drive into the transfer station. There's a little shed immediately in front of you as you sort of turn into the transfer station where people can get sand for their driveways. And then there's a road that leads up to it quite steeply. It's not a, it's more of a trail. It's not of a standard that would facilitate access to the top of the parcel. The parcel rises up steeply and it has an antenna tower for communication for town vehicles at the high point of the parcel. And then the parcel sort of runs, as Jackie said, and Brian said, along New Boston Road. I think it's about 27 acres in total, from memory. The question is how to delineate the landfill function. It clearly is something that is dominates the kind of the lower end. Let me just do this really quickly, and then I can actually show you this.
No, because it's at the other end of the dump.
Oh,
Dump is
not
one
the
end.
dump.
Right. It's not even neat. No. See.
So if you can see my screen, this is-
Yep, it's starting to pinch out for bigger view. There we are. Yep.
okay, so that's the parcel in question. So you enter here off New Boston Road, and this is the transfer station, which most people are familiar with, and this is the highway department facility. You'll see this road curve around here, and you'll see this area at the end here. So this is a stump dump, and all this hill here, apparently, this is anecdotal, but it's anecdotal from long-term workers that have been a part of DPW. At various times, this is not a very stable slope, and chunks of trash fall out from here. So the question is, what was the extent of the landfill area? Most people understand it to have occurred down here. And I suspect that, in fact, they dug out material here that was useful for driveways and so forth, road making, because it would have been deposited from the stream, which is just here. The stream flows this way. So this would have been a washout at some point, thousands of years ago. So it would have been good material to quarry, and it would have been pretty easy to access. My suspicion is that definitely has now got compacted trash in it. And it's listed as a landfill site on the state's landfill site database. What we don't have is any delineation of the extent of the landfill. So this big pile of stuff here, that's the sand pile. And then this is the salt shed. So I think people are interested in using this as the area where housing would happen. The communication tower is about there, right in the middle of it. This is a very steep, and this is probably better described as a sort of a jeep trail, not really a driveway even, or a road. These woods are this is pretty heavily wooded slope. It's pretty steep. You can see just from the sort of weird distortion of the image here, this through here is practically vertical. There's a gully. This is sort of a little water body that feeds into the stream down here at the intersection of the two roads. So crossing from here to here is challenging, and also dangerous given the shape of the road, right? So you got this S-bend. It's not probably viable as a driveway entrance point. You could do better, and it would depend on the neighbors and so forth as to whether they're agreeable to that. This slope here is incredibly steep. So you're probably talking about an area like this that would potentially be suitable for development. It seems improbable that that's landfill, just given the nature of it. But in terms of access, it may have to come from this point. So it's, like I said, it's got potential, but it's challenging. And so, yeah, it's a little smaller than I thought. It's not 27, it's 24.48 acres. And this
Okay.
area down here is well over, from here, this is well over 12.
Mhm.
Okay,
I hope
that's,
I hope that helps.
that helps me. I was having a hard time picturing exactly
Right.
where it was.
You know, the only other comment to be made is it's not horrendous, but you know, there's a lot of noise and some level of dust generated by this use, right? So when the transfer station's happening, you know, there's that, and then the highway department should be regarded as a 24/7 facility, particularly in winter. You know, so it's trucks backing up and making the beep 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 noise and all, you know, all those things that are really important to understand. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's obviously not so bad. These people have never complained. These people have never complained. I guess they benefit from getting their road plowed really early and really often. So, you know, there's good and bad. If you're really good, you could probably throw your recycling in and have it land here. So there's pluses, but I also want to point out, you know, it's not idyllic, quiet, rural Norwich. It's got amenity. It's got some nice amenity. You're up high, you probably get a good view, but it comes with some challenges. I think it's the fairest way of saying it.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I see that Mark and Brian have both got their hands up. So
Yep. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah, go ahead.
do you want me to stop sharing the map? Is that going to help?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Rod. Mark, you have a comment? And then Brian?
I think Brian might have gone first, so I'll let you go, but
Okay.
I
I didn't see the
comments.
hands. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Mark. So just a reminder, there are no great town-owned sites to do development. The reason we're talking about people rolling in their graves and former dumps is because there are no great sites. We're down to those two because they have the fewest, if you can believe it, obvious problems. And the challenge we're trying to overcome is the astronomical value of land in Norwich. And that is the primary obstacle to developing any housing that could be even close to be called affordable. And
Which we
so-
haven't done in 30 years.
Yeah, and so the
30
idea of
years.
the town lowering the development cost by conveying property is very attractive. And so by going the planning grant route, we have the opportunity, potentially, if we're successful, to have some technical analysis paid for. And then we can know if really there's any sites at all. That's what we're talking about.
On this parcel, any sites on this parcel that we could squeeze in a few townhouses or whatever. That's what we're trying to get done so that we can make a difference after 30 years of not having an affordable house built. That's good. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So Brian, I guess I know that spot well. I guess I could easily imagine a new Boston Road version of Star Lake up there. You know, like yeah, there's challenges, right? It's steep. You got to make sure that the soil's okay for septic. There's a number of challenges, and I agree to your first comment that there's nothing that's ideal. So I understand the next step is like we're getting held up on, can there be an assessment so that we can use grant money to find out if there's something there. That's just to make sure I understand the problem. Is that the problem right now?
The town
Yep.
would work with Two Rivers to submit a planning grant application, and the grant would pay for the technical analysis.
The assessment. Okay. All right. Just make sure. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Ernie.
Has anyone thought about doing some kind of a study to figure out how we got here and having such expensive real estate? I mean, obviously the market's part of the problem, but I mean, people have been talking for 30 years, or probably more than that, but I've only been here 33, about the taxes and the valuations going up and so on and so forth, and it's becoming somewhat more of an elitist town and more and more and more and more and more, till here we are, it's predominantly elitist now. I mean, there has to be, it beggars the mind, it beggars the imagination to think that there is no possible way of reversing this trend. And there has to be, you know, in a town that wants to apply a study for everything, this seems to be something important that a study should be called for. And since economics, the economy of the region or the town is a part of the purview of the planning commission, maybe we should be asking for a study for that, to have, to see if there is any way that we can find a way to control the valuation of properties here. I mean, as both a lister and on the Board of Civil Authority, I mean, what we've seen is people that just will move into the town and pay above the asking price to live here. And now what draws them here to do that? You know, and then they get mad and demand that their taxes be, you know, their valuations be lowered, when the law says, you know, what you paid is what your valuation is going to be at some point as soon as there's an assessment done. So maybe there should be a study that starts looking at that, because, you know, Brian's clearly delineating a problem that is really intractable, and it really, you know, he's applying it to, you know, to one issue, but it really is a broad-based issue for a lot of people. And, you know, maybe something should be being done, and maybe the planning commission is a place to start the call for having something looked into.
The housing chapter plus the appendix to the town plan really goes into that in the best detail that I think we've gone into it, that I'm aware of. So there has been quite a bit done. And what the Affordable Housing Committee is trying to do now is to solve the problem, okay?
We're trying to solve the problem of affordable housing itself. That's their charge.
One step at a time.
But the thing is it sounds like the foundational problem is
Right.
the land, and that hasn't been really addressed. We know the statistics. That's what you're talking about. That's what's in the town plan. That's what's here on the ground. How did we get here, you know, beyond just market forces and so on and so forth? Because people have been trying to, you know, have been looking for ways to stop it.
Yep.
Why, you know, maybe now because there is a concerted effort to produce affordable housing, maybe it's time for a concerted effort to find out how to make things affordable, not just, you know, and that means looking at the root of the problem and finding a way to reverse the problem. I mean, this is a problem. These values aren't really in line with, you know, other places that are going with market. This is a strange economy in this town. And
Mark, did you have a question? I'm sorry, you have your hand up, or you want to make a motion? You have your hand up. Maybe you have your hand up.
Oh, sorry, actually, it detracts from Ernie. It goes back to the affordable housing and the dump plot. I hate to call it that. Can I ask that? Sorry, Ernie, I wasn't trying to cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll
it was
get
follow-
you. Don't worry.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Rod, if I understand the zoning that we talked about earlier, if the dump plot is suitable to build, are we subject to that 2 acre per the 2 acre limit? Or is that something that we can address at the zoning? Say, hey, this works. Maybe we're going to have an affordable housing zone where you can have greater density. Is that too creative?
Okay, so I'm going to share again.
Okay.
Okay.
It's probably like 8-10 acres. Maybe you could put 5 Starlake houses.
So the first thing, I think you actually enumerated some of the challenges. So it is in the rural residential district. If we carved this parcel off somehow to make this somewhere in that probably 8 to 10 acre range, then it would be subject to all the standards that apply currently to the rural residential, assuming that when we're ready to develop this is a scenario, right? Like, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but you know, imagine that people say yes. Imagine that you move forward. Imagine that you make this into an 8 to 10 acre parcel, but the amended land use regulations are not yet in place. Then when it is subject to the 2 acre provision and or the constraints introduced by the density factor analysis. So you'd have to exclude steep slopes from the developable area. So there's a range of factors that we've already looked at in some of the stuff that we've done with the land use regulations, the existing land use regulations, that would have an impact on the developable area of this sort of this blob, right? So even though it looks like 10 acres, you might be down to 3 or 4, assuming that septic suitability is not a problem. You might be down to 3 or 4 for actually buildable area, right? Which, you know, is not awful. You know, if it stays, if the rest of it stays as open space or whatever, that it's doable. But realistically, you know, it's probably a series of duplexes or triplexes or something such as that, right?
And I think it's what the Affordable Housing Committee has imagined. I mean, that's what they've imagined at the
Right.
moment.
So it's not going to be, and that's the other thing to reassure, you know, people in the neighborhood that might have potential concerns, right? We're not actually talking about, you know, 40 households moving in and all the traffic and noise associated with that. We're talking about, you know, 6 or something in that range, right?
So do we make that like a, oh, sorry.
Yep. So that was my very back of the envelope, knowing the land, knowing the regs. That's sort of where you'd end up. You could do better than that, but I don't think hugely so.
Right. And to do more than that, we'd have to like drop a blob of village in there or something, right? Like given our current regs.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'd have to do some really radical reworking of the zoning regs. So,
Okay.
I mean, you could treat this as a motivating force for getting through the zoning regs.
All right, there you go.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for clarifying.
Huge
I appreciate it.
digress.
No more questions from me.
All right, what I'd like to do is, do we have a motion to move this memo to the select board so that we can get a grant to do the study? Brian is so moved. Do we have a second? Thank you, Vince. I'll do a roll call. Vince, how do you vote? Yes, good. Mark? Yes. Brian? Yes. Melissa? Yes. And Ernie?
No,
Okay.
So, Jackie, can I just ask who seconded that? Vince. Okay,
Vince
great. Thank you,
seconded,
Vince.
Yeah,
Okay.
seconded. I also voted yes. Sorry, I forgot myself. Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, now almost winding up here. The next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from June 14th. You all have them in front of you. Jeff sent us an email earlier that he had a question about it. I asked him for clarification. I have not heard back from him. I will double check. Okay, I've not heard back from him. So the question is, we want to approve these minutes tonight? Do we want to wait 2 months to approve them? Because we will be together again in September, okay?
I'm happy to wait, Jackie.
Anybody else? People are nodding.
I'd
What
move
is it?
to,
I
I
will.
would move to wait.
Wait, okay.
Yep.
All right, so we got, I'm not hearing any other action there, so we'll move to wait on the, or we'll wait on the, wait on the minutes, how's that? And then,
excuse me, Jackie.
Yes.
Will that violate the open meeting law? I just remembered that. I mean,
What?
because aren't we supposed to produce the minutes within a certain time frame for the public to be able to see?
no,
them?
we did that. We've met our
All right, then.
completely met those obligations. It's
All
just a
right,
matter
just
of
making sure.
proving what's been written. Okay,
All right.
great.
And I'd say wait too.
Okay, any other business? In terms of our future meeting schedule, as I mentioned, no meeting in August. We'll meet again on September 13th. In terms of the agenda, we will just, with the easy things, we'll have the wastewater update. We will have the affordable housing status on this grant, approval of this grant, going forward with this grant application, hopefully, and then any next steps with the fire district land and trying to move forward with an assessment of that property. And then in terms of the land use regs that we just looked at, the next step there. Rod, what are you envisioning comes after the exercise we just did tonight?
That's a good question. I think there's some other background stuff to do, but I think that basically we're getting pretty close to beginning to discuss the districts and what what the area, what looking at that map in more detail, looking at the map that I presented to you tonight,
Yep. Mhm.
posing questions about whether you think there should be changes in the area of the districts vis-a-vis each other. And then I think that we will have, in the September timeframe, we'll have a more definitive outcome from the density study, which
Yeah.
will help
Yes,
feed
I
into
saw
that.
that. I saw that on your
And
milestone.
so I feel like we'll be revisiting the density study and trying to sort of make some conclusions there. And it's what you'd expect. It's a bit muddy,
I know.
yeah,
Mhm.
there's things going in different directions, but in general,
Mhm.
I think that it demonstrates what I was talking about earlier tonight, that much of the rural residential area,
Yep.
I think it demonstrates that there's a lot of variety in the rural residential area, and that the density factor doesn't really account for that difference, right? So for instance, where Vince lives is rural residential, but so also is somewhere way out on the end of Tiger Town, which is like 20 minutes drive from the village, maybe 15 minutes drive if you drive at the speed limit, everybody, and is really different. It's really different land. It's really different. It's a really different neighborhood. Is that the same? Like, and
Yep.
what does that mean?
Okay, so we'll work on that. I
So
think that's good.
that would be the discussion. And I think that the other big issue out there, which will also be important to discuss, is how viable is the so-called commercial and industrial district, the one down on Route 5 South. And a deeper analysis of that might be useful if you actually look at the land area. Somewhat typically for this part of the Upper Valley, it's dominated by educational uses, in particular playing fields.
Yep.
Which is not, the last time I checked in, an industrial powerhouse, but that's okay, I guess. If you wanted to make it an industrial powerhouse, what would you really need to do, right? So, or are people actually happier with it being playing fields? And then, does it make sense to call that district commercial and industrial if the single biggest land use is kids hitting a ball? So,
Is there
you know,
anything this group can do between now and September 13th to be better prepared for that discussion? Is there anything that you can think of?
given that it's summer, and
Mhm.
given that you're around, or that you're going to be around most of the time, actually, it's the self-study moment. It's going for walks and hikes, and even driving around and looking carefully at what at various neighborhoods and various parts of town, and thinking about it. The other area that I want to draw your attention to is right up in the north, Union Village, which is kind of split between Thetford and Norwich. It's an old center of, it's an old village area. If people are not familiar with that, then maybe spend a little bit more time there. Think about what the scope is for expanding or changing that a little bit, or how does that connect to the main village, if you like. So just spend some time taking advantage of the weather, getting around, but thinking about what you're looking at from the standpoint of like, well, why is this like this? What how different could it be? What would work here? And then I think a realistic kind of assessment even of the amount of land that is devoted to active farming, what could reasonably be done to protect that. I'm enough of an agricultural worker to actually want to distinguish between hay fields and actual farms. And I think that there's a lot of Norwich that falls into the category of hay fields, which are the lowest. I rely on hay every day. I like good hay, don't get me wrong, but it's not actually the same as
Growing
really
a tomato.
really strenuous farming. Okay. It's still dangerous and it's still smelly and you can still hurt yourself, but it's not the same as, growing zucchinis for 20 acres of zucchinis. It's just not the same thing. Or raising livestock. It's haying is like glorified grass growing, which, is a thing,
You've given us
but
a
it's,
lot
yeah.
about
But
Rod
it's-
as
so-
always. Given us a
So
Rod,
lot.
that's what I want. That's what I want people to think about. I want you to
I
try-
grew up haying my whole life and raising the livestock that ate the hay, so.
All right.
there you go.
Which I just want to note, the Historical Society has a walking tour of Union Village coming up in August, so.
Oh, that's excellent.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
That
and
would
I
be
will
really good.
give
for people to do.
everybody a link on that, because, yeah, I think that might be
Right.
useful. for you. All right, we're down to public comment. Nancy and Linda, you've been very patient and good to listen all this time. Anything you want to ask or, yeah, there you go. Linda, go ahead. You're on mute.
Yeah,
Yep.
the only thing, thank you. The only thing I would like to ask is, you shared maps material that was not included in the packet.
Mhm.
If that could have been in the packet, I could have been following along with you, and now it may be shared at the next meeting, but if there's some way to incorporate that
Sure.
anytime there's something to be shared.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, it was a simple map of the town and the 5 zoning districts that appears in our town plan that I know you have copied, but yes, I take your point. Yeah, good catch. Thank you. And then,
Okay, well, thank you.
yeah, that's good. And then anybody else, Nancy, are you good? Here you go. You're unmuting.
I'm unmuting and I'm speaking of, I am a member of the Norwich Historic Preservation Commission, but I'm not speaking for the commission. I am a lover of historic structures, and I hope that when you consider revising your zoning, that you will keep in mind the importance of those in the village and beyond. Give to Norwich their importance to Norwich, and I hope that you will safeguard their architectural integrity and recognize the importance they give to the quality of life in Norwich.
Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate that. Yep, great. Linda, your hand's up again. I think it might be from the last time. I'm not sure.
Sorry, let me put it down.
Okay, no worries. I just didn't want to miss it. Okay. If there's nothing else we didn't talk about that we should have, do we have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Brian. Do I hear a second? Was that Vince's hand I saw? Yeah, thank you. All in favor? And have a great summer, folks. I really appreciate it, your work, and we'll see you on September 13th, if not before. Bye-bye.